Few civilizations in human history captivate the imagination like ancient Egypt. The pyramids, the temples, the art, all testaments to a people who left an eternal mark on the world. But today, some groups are attempting to rewrite that history, claiming ancient Egypt as their own, often without historical, linguistic, or archaeological evidence. So let's set the record straight. Yes, Egypt has always been geographically part of Africa, but the term Africa itself is not ancient. In fact, the word Africa comes from the Roman name Afri, used to describe tribes around modern-day Tunisia. Only later did Europeans apply it to the entire continent. So to project today's idea of Africa back onto ancient Egypt is a modern misunderstanding. Afrocentric narratives often argue that because Egypt is in Africa, it must be Black African in the modern racial sense. But this approach oversimplifies thousands of years of complex history and cultural identity. Ancient peoples did not categorize themselves by race in the way we do today. Instead, they defined themselves by language, culture, and territory. The Egyptians left us a crystal-clear record of how they saw themselves and others. In inscriptions and tomb paintings, they depicted their own people distinctly, with reddish-brown skin tones for men. This convention reflected time spent outdoors. Men were more often shown as farmers, soldiers, and workers under the sun. Women were usually painted with lighter, yellowish or pale skin tones. This convention reflected indoor life, beauty ideals, and status. The ancient Egyptians usually depicted themselves with slim builds and recognizable facial features. Side by side, they portrayed neighbors, Kushites with darker skin and different body types, Libyans with lighter skin and tattoos, Asiatics with beards and colorful robes. These distinctions weren't accidental. They were intentional, meant to show cultural and ethnic differences. Egypt also had great respect for Punt, often called the land of the gods, most likely encompassing parts of modern-day Eritrea, eastern Sudan, the Horn of Africa, especially Somalia, and southwest of the Arab Peninsula. Reliefs from Hatshepsut's temple show the Puntites, curly hair, different body proportions, and darker complexions. They are not depicted as Egyptians. Instead, the Egyptians honored Punt as an ally and trading partner, but always portrayed them as distinct. When we look at the reliefs of Hatshepsut's great expedition to Punt at Deir el-Bahri, the difference between Egyptians and Puntites is striking. Egyptians portrayed themselves with their familiar reddish-brown skin tones, slim builds, and fine facial features. But the Puntites are shown with darker complexions, broader noses, fuller lips, and curly or frizzy hair, traits that closely resemble those of modern East African and Horn of Africa populations. Even body proportions differ. Puntite men and women are depicted with stockier builds compared to the slimmer Egyptian form. This wasn't an accident of style, it was intentional, a visual code showing that the Puntites were respected partners but clearly a different people. And these artistic details line up remarkably well with what we recognize today in African physiognomy, making it clear that the Egyptians themselves did not see Punt as part of their own race, but as a distinct neighbor. This evidence tells us something crucial. Egypt's identity wasn't about skin color. It was about language, culture, and a continuity of traditions that lasted over 3,000 years. To reduce that heritage to a single modern racial category is not only inaccurate, it's cultural appropriation. When groups today try to claim Egypt as exclusively theirs, they erase the real complexity of history. Ancient Egypt was unique. It was influenced by its African neighbors, by the Levant, and by the Mediterranean. But it was its own civilization. Claiming it without evidence is not celebrating history. It's rewriting it. By respecting the evidence the Egyptians left behind, we can honor their true legacy, without distortion, without appropriation, and without myth. Now let's flip the perspective. Beyond the art and inscriptions, what does the DNA evidence actually reveal? Are modern Egyptians truly the descendants of the ancient Egyptians? For years, this question has been surrounded by speculation, myth, and political agendas. But today, science gives us an answer, written in our DNA. Some claim that modern Egyptians are not the true heirs of ancient Egypt, suggesting invasions and migrations erase the old bloodlines. But is that really true? Genetic research says otherwise. In 2017, a groundbreaking study was published in Nature Communications. Researchers extracted DNA from 151 ancient Egyptian mummies from Abusir el-Melek, dating from the New Kingdom to the Roman period. What they found was stunning. The mummies shared strong genetic continuity with modern Egyptians. Ancient and modern Egyptians are far more similar to each other than to any outside population. And if you think that was not old enough, check this out. A full genome of Old Kingdom individual. For the first time ever, scientists sequenced a whole genome from an individual dating to Egypt's Old Kingdom, approximately 4,800 years ago, one of the earliest dynastic periods. This individual's ancestry, approximately 80% North African and 20% Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamian, West Asian. Modeling suggests modern Egyptians draw up to 75% of their ancestry from groups related to either this Old Kingdom individual or similar Middle Neolithic Moroccan populations. The rest includes components related to Bronze Age Levant and more recent Sub-Saharan and West East African admixture. Modern Egyptians carry a DNA profile that is still overwhelmingly consistent with their ancient ancestors. The continuity is remarkable, spanning more than 4,000 years. Genetic analysis shows over 80% of modern Egyptian ancestry can be traced directly back to ancient Egyptians. Sub-Saharan admixture appears only in the last 1,500 years, likely due to the trans-Saharan trade. Middle Eastern admixture increased slightly after the Arab conquest, but it never replaced the core Egyptian genetic identity. This means that the farmers in Upper Egypt, the families in Cairo, the fishermen in the Delta, they all carry in their blood a direct link to the pyramid builders, the temple priests, and the scribes of the Nile. No wave of invaders erased Egypt's identity. Instead, Egyptians absorbed influences over time, but the core lineage remained firmly intact. Despite myths that ancient Egypt disappeared or was replaced by foreign settlers, the DNA evidence proves the opposite. The ancient Egyptians are not gone. They are alive in the modern Egyptian people. Cultural shifts happened, languages changed, religions changed, but the bloodlines remained. The DNA doesn't lie. Modern Egyptians are the living legacy of one of the greatest civilizations in human history. The pyramids, the temples, the language, and the genes, all carried forward by the people of Egypt today. Ancient Egypt was diverse, tolerant, and welcoming to outsiders, yet at its core it maintained a dominant, distinctive identity unlike any other. Egypt's geography made it a natural crossroads. The Nile connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean, the Sinai linked it to Asia, the Red Sea opened routes to Punt and beyond. Traders, diplomats, and migrants from Kush, Libya, Canaan, and even further afield all passed through Egypt's gates. The Egyptians documented this openness. In temple walls and tombs we see Kushites with dark skin, Libyans with fairer tones and tattoos, Asiatics with beards and robes, all depicted respectfully as guests, allies, or traders. Egypt was tolerant and pragmatic. If you brought wealth, knowledge, or loyalty, you could find a place in the land of the Nile. But amid this diversity, the Egyptians always portrayed themselves in a way that stood apart. Their art consistently shows reddish-brown skin tones for men. This convention reflected time spent outdoors. Men were more often shown as farmers, soldiers, and workers under the sun. Women were usually painted with lighter, yellowish, or pale skin tones. This convention reflected indoor life, beauty ideals, and status. Slim, elongated body structures with unique cranial features documented in skeletal studies. A cultural pride that defined them as Remech on Kemet, the people of Egypt. This was not random. It was a marker of identity, showing that Egypt recognized diversity around it but saw itself as a separate and unique people. Afrocentric claims often argue that because Egypt is in Africa, Egyptians must have been black in the modern sense. But here's the problem. Ancient Egyptians clearly distinguished themselves from their darker-skinned southern neighbors. Linguistically, they spoke a language that belongs to the Afro-Asiatic family, connected to Semitic and Berber tongues, not sub-Saharan language groups. Genetically, modern and ancient DNA show continuity of a North African and Near Eastern blend, not a purely sub-Saharan profile. To flatten this unique identity into a single modern racial label erases the truth of what they actually were, a distinct race and culture, shaped by their geography and history. Egypt was always diverse. Soldiers, wives, and merchants from abroad joined Egyptian life. Some became fully assimilated. Yet despite this flow, the Egyptian core identity remained intact for thousands of years. Even today, genetic and cultural continuity links modern Egyptians to their ancient ancestors, proving that the civilization did not vanish or get replaced. So, was ancient Egypt African? Yes, geographically. Was it black in the modern racial sense? No. Ancient Egypt was a tolerant, diverse empire with a proud, distinctive people who forged one of humanity's greatest civilizations. And that uniqueness is still alive today. In Egypt, in its people, and in the legacy of Kemet. Now we'll take apart the most common Afrocentric myths, one by one. Myth 1. Egyptians were black because Egypt is in Africa. Yes, Egypt is geographically in Africa, but the idea of Africa as one cultural and racial unit is modern. The ancient Egyptians saw themselves as distinct from their neighbors. In their own art, they depicted themselves differently from Kushites, Libyans, and Asiatics. DNA studies confirm continuity of a North African Near Eastern population, not a sub-Saharan one. Geography does not equal racial identity. Myth 2. Kushites and Egyptians were the same people. Kushites played a huge role in Egyptian history. They were allies and traders, but the Egyptians always depicted Kushites with different physical features and darker skin tones. The Kushites who lived in Egypt adopted Egyptian customs, language, and religion, showing they were distinct neighbors, not the same people. Myth 3. Greek and Roman writers said Egyptians were black. Afrocentrists often quote Herodotus saying Egyptians were melanchros, dark-skinned. But in ancient Greek, melanchros means dark or swarthy compared to Mediterranean standards, not sub-Saharan African. Greek authors also use the same term for Southern Europeans. To claim this means black African is misleading. Myth 4. Egyptian gods like Osiris were black, proving Egyptians were black. Osiris, Osir, is often shown with green or black skin, but this was symbolic. Black symbolized fertility, rebirth, and the fertile Nile soil. It was not meant as a literal racial depiction. Myth 5. Cleopatra was black. Cleopatra VII, the last Ptolemaic ruler of Egypt, was of Macedonian Greek descent, from the line of Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals. Coins and busts show her with Mediterranean features. While her maternal ancestry isn't fully documented, there is no credible evidence she was sub-Saharan African. Afrocentric claims about Cleopatra are pure myth. Myth 6. Egyptian achievements were stolen from Black Africa. Egyptians borrowed and exchanged with Kushites, Libyans, Levantines, and others. But the pyramids, hieroglyphs, and temples are uniquely Egyptian inventions developed over centuries. Afrocentric claims of stolen achievements are an erasure of Egypt's authentic genius. just as wrong as when others try to attribute Egypt's glory to aliens or Atlantis. Myth 7. Modern Egyptians are Arabs, not descendants of the ancient Egyptians. Some claim invasions erase the ancient bloodline, but DNA studies show strong continuity between ancient and modern Egyptians. While Arab, Greek, and other admixtures exist, modern Egyptians overwhelmingly descend from their ancient ancestors. The heritage is alive today. Afrocentrism tries to claim Egypt as exclusively black, but history shows us something far richer. Egypt was a crossroads, diverse, tolerant, and unique. Its people were distinct with their own race, culture, and identity that cannot be reduced to modern racial labels. Ancient Egypt does not need to be stolen. It already belongs to history, to humanity, and to the people of the Nile. If you want more myth-busting history, subscribe and share, because the past deserves honesty.